Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York City-based jazz pianist and composer Sullivan Fortner. He is gearing up for a Kansas City visit as a part of the Charlie Parker Celebration festivities from August 17th to 29, 2017 in Kansas City, and he is ready. Along with his upcoming visit, he had much to talk about his hometown of New Orleans, his current home of New York, his life in jazz, and so much more. So get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Yes, sir.
Sullivan, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and start off here. Let me get an idea before we get into kind of the elephant in the room, which is your residency here in Kansas City for the Charlie Parker celebration. Give me an idea of activity that's going on in your world, whether it's touring, albums, things that are happening with you.
Well, my name is Sullivan Fortner. I'm 30 years old. I've been playing piano since I was 4 years old. Moved to New York in 2008, performing with, mostly since then I've been on the road, touring with various different bands. Roy Hargrove Quintet, Stephon Harris Blackout, Cecile McLaurin Savant, John Schofield Quartet, the Clayton Brothers, Wynton Marsalis, and all of that in this past year. Paul Simon, it's kind of been all over, kind of recording and touring with those artists.
How did this Kansas City agreement, this trip that you're going to make to Kansas City come about? How did that happen?
The way I understand it, Tavon Pennicott, who's a friend of mine, did it last year, and he came back. We met up, and I just saw him randomly. He was like, "Man, I just got back from this thing in Kansas City. It was great. You should. I'm gonna try to throw them your name next year, see if you could do it with me." And I was like, "Man, okay, sure. Well, it's fine." And I didn't really think too much of it. And then I got a call from my agent, Chris Meese, who's basically like, if you want to do it, it's a really, really cool gig. Tavon's going to do it with you, So I was like, all right, I'm free those 2 weeks. Why not? So that's how it came about. So,
well, obviously there's a rich history in Kansas City with jazz. Obviously Charlie Parker, who's one of the best-known names in jazz, is from here, and it's in celebration of his life. How do you feel about coming here beyond what you've heard and being open and all of those kinds of things? How do you feel about this opportunity?
I feel honored, it's very interesting, man. I mean, I've been to Kansas City quite a few times, performed there quite a few times with different artists. I was just down there recently with John Schofield's quartet for the Jazz Festival. And aside from the fact that, I can't wait to have some more ribs.
That's right.
Musically speaking, I heard somewhere through the grapevine it said, jazz was born in New Orleans and then moved up the river to Kansas City where it became a man and got pants. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I'll go with it for the sake of, I'm going to Kansas City, and this is a Kansas City radio.
I dig it.
But I will say that the music did change when it moved up the river. From New Orleans to Chicago and down. You think of people like Jay McShann, you think of people like Mary Lou Williams, you think of people like Count Basie. There's such rich history. I think it's a street, the 18th Street or something. I'm trying to remember exactly.
18 and Vine.
Yeah, that's kind of like the precursor to the 52nd Street movement in New York. All was happening kind of similar at the same time. So to me, just to be a part and to actually, I probably won't be able to, maybe some of those places don't exist anymore, but to be in there to soak up whatever was happening down there in Kansas City and what is happening down there currently now, people like Logan Richardson and Bobby Watson and a bunch of other people who are down there and who I'm going to meet and play with these next few weeks, it'll be interesting. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm just looking forward to just, going into another area of the United States and, seeing how people interpret, music, seeing what's different about it, and jump in the pool and swim around a little bit and see what happens.
Speaking of New Orleans, that right there, as far as I'm concerned, is a cradle, is the hub, the birth, the beginning. Louis Armstrong, you go down the line. What was it like growing up in New Orleans to give yourself such a backbone in jazz?
strangely enough, my story is a little interesting. I didn't really get into jazz until high school. So the only, exposure that I had, the main exposure I had to music up to that time was strictly gospel music. And New Orleans isn't really, really known for gospel, but, for New Orleans musicians, New Orleans musicians, gospel music is, pretty interesting. It has a certain type of history given, Mahalia Jackson's from there. I didn't really get into New Orleans and jazz music, New Orleans jazz music specifically, until I got to high school. I mean, I heard it on Mardi Gras or, on TV, Dr. John plays this on, television commercial or Popeye's chicken ad. You know what I mean? It wasn't anything really all of that. I wouldn't really have that much exposure to the music until I got to high school, which was at the New Orleans Central Creative Arts, and some of my classmates there, really kind of helped to expose me to the music, so to speak. People like, Christian Scott, Trombone Shorty Andrews, Jonathan Baptiste, those are kind of more the name guys from there. But they were in my class, so to speak. But since, while learning about it, I began to really understand and appreciate the significance that New Orleans had in the development of jazz, especially modern jazz, which is also a very, very small, kept secret. Not a lot of people don't really know that, about the history of modern jazz in New Orleans as opposed to just traditional second-line band jazz, so to speak.
Well, speaking of modern stuff and the history and evolution of things, was there a particular album or collection of albums when you started getting baptized in the jazz arts that really kind of swayed you and made you say, man, this is how I want to live my life?
Errol Garner's Concert by the Sea was the album that popped my cherry in there. I do distinctly remember the first time I heard Oscar Peterson's We Get Requests. I distinctly remember the first Duke Ellington record I got, which was a compilation. I'm skipping on the cover. And then, when you study with people, you get their records. So my first piano teacher was a guy named Peter Martin, who plays with Diane Reeves. And I got his record, he told me to check out Herbie Hancock's theme from Blow Up, and I pretty much learned that whole record in a week. So that was my, according to him. I don't know if I could play anything from that record now, but according to him, I learned that whole record in a week.
So you're a well-educated man. You've gone to Oberlin Conservatory, Manhattan School of Music. You got a bachelor's, master's degree. But I think in the world of jazz, you really get your doctorate and get baptized well in the world of jazz when you're out with people. What kind of lessons did you learn from Roy Hargrove and Stephon Harris, people that had so much mileage in their rear view, not only about being a musician, but about being a participant in this human dance that we're in?
Oh, boy. Well, Stephon was my introduction to touring, especially European touring. It was the first band that I kind of walked into that, I didn't really know anybody in the band except for Stephon. You know what I mean? So I came and I was kind of either subbing or replacing Mark Carey, who was the pianist in that band, who was the original pianist in that band. One of the originals. And, so I already came in with a strange vibe. You know what I mean? Because I missed Mark.
Yeah. I dig it.
It was similar to Roy in the fact that, Roy had been kind of scouted for pianists, for quite a few years since Gerald had left, and they had a lot of piano players that kind of was on rotation. Started with, finally he settled on Joe Holmes, a guy from Maryland, who lives in the Ukraine now. And then Joe couldn't make some dates, so he finally settled on Jonathan Baptiste. Jonathan was his pianist, and then I kind of came in because Jonathan double booked himself. So I'm kind of stepping on a bunch of piano players' toes on both scenarios of the band. And what that kind of taught me was that, basically, no gig is really definite. That's the thing is, that's my gig. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to not be swayed by other people's kind of vibes or opinions about what they think you'll do. It's just a matter of just getting in and just playing the music as best as you can, trying to hang on.
Sure.
And under a lot of pressure, because those are all great pianists whose shoes you're trying to fill. You know what I mean?
Sure.
One lesson that I got from Stefan that was very interesting was never to deny or ignore, the things that you love about music, and to never deny or ignore your roots. It came at a time, and it was great advice too, because it came at a time where I was, being swayed by different opinions of what I should do, because I was in college. I was still getting my master's degree at Manhattan School, and all of these influences were coming in, and I was trying to incorporate everything and trying to please a whole lot of people. And he was like, "Man, just play, play music that you love and play the music that you grew up with. Don't try to be, always just remember that. Remember that in everything that you learn, everything that you learned new about music. Remember what it was that made you fall in love with it in the first place, and play from that." Roy's situation is very interesting because one of the main things I remember him basically is, because he's the type of person that teaches you without words. He says absolutely nothing to you. But I distinctly remember one thing that, he stresses, and that's the importance of understanding the tradition and the fabric that makes up the music. So becoming familiar and understanding the music of Charlie Parker, and understanding the music of Fats Navarro, and understanding the music of Louis Armstrong, and understanding the music of Freddie Hubbard, and all of these guys, because those are the guys that he came through. And in order to play with him, you have to understand, who he likes. And you begin to develop an appreciation for the geniuses, the true geniuses of modern music.
Well, a healthy reverence of history is always a good thing to have. The one thing I think you're going to discover about Kansas City, and obviously I'm biased, and I don't want to put any words in your head that may sway you otherwise, but from what I've seen as somebody that looks in on the scene and covers it from my perspective, is that it's a tight-knit group. Everybody supports each other. You can jump in, really a supportive community. So I'm curious, with another cradle of jazz in New Orleans, what's the scene like? How do the musicians intermingle, and what's kind of the vibe there in New Orleans?
I live in New York now, so I'm a little bit detached from the New Orleans scene, so to speak. I can say that New Orleans musicians are very, very, everybody, all the New Orleans musicians know each other. That's the first thing. And that there's a really rich history of modern musicians who come from that and who actually move back and who give back to the community, be it, through bands, or be it through, schools or whatever. You know what I mean? People like Donald Harrison and Terrence Blanchard, those guys still live there. Christian Scott, I think, moved down there. And Nicholas Payton's there. So there's a lot of musicians that are there that's teaching and giving back to the community and, helping to, foster younger musicians. So there's always a rich culture of older musicians looking out for younger musicians, so to speak. If you're from New Orleans, then you pretty much have all the other New Orleans musicians on your corner. Now, whether or not they choose to talk trash about you is a whole other thing.
Absolutely.
As musicians do. That's a part of it. I guess that's a part of the history of it. But I would say overall it's a very, very tight knit family, and even being in New Orleans, I mean, being in New York, you know, there are a lot of New Orleans musicians who live in New York, and you know, we all look out for each other. You know, from Winton all the way on down. You know,
without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in your career, you've been given awards. You got the Cole Porter Fellowship in 2015. What do awards mean to you? How does that fuel your approach? Does it affect how you approach things?
Not really. I don't really like a whole lot of it, and I'm not one that feeds off of opinions. Well, I mean, I do feed off of opinions. I'm lying. I mean, because the music's very tough, man, and especially when you don't really get a whole lot of direction from people. It's really hard to see, hard to know if you're going in a direction that's, the right way, if you're going the right way, so to speak.
Sure.
So sometimes awards could be kind of a reassurance that you're in the right direction. You need to keep doing what you're doing and keep working the way you're working. Keep pushing the way you're pushing. But other than that, it doesn't really do very much for, as far as my attitude or, how I look at how I play or whatever.
Sure.
I still think I have a long way to go as far as, music is concerned.
Sure. No, and that answers a question that I was going to ask about your career, but I want to ask you kind of a generic question as a practitioner of jazz, and you've dedicated your life to it. Why do you love jazz?
I guess the same reason why I hate jazz is why I love it. It's probably the only art form, the only musical art form that forces you to bring your complete self to it and to leave yourself completely vulnerable in order for it to work. And while being vulnerable, you have to also sacrifice a lot for the sake of the music, for the sake of the other players. And when the sacrifice level is the same, that's when the music really explodes. That's kind of a long or short answer.
No, I like it. I like it. The one thing I'm curious about, too, being from New Orleans and now you're in New York and there's so much history in both of these towns and you're coming to a town that's full of history, let's get kind of fantastical here and say that the Jazz DeLorean pulls up in front of your house and you can punch in the coordinates. You can go to whatever year and location you want to go to. Who are you going to go see? Who would you want to see in the history of jazz that would satisfy you?
I want to see Art Tatum play. I want to see, there's a picture that somebody gave me. There's a picture of Art Tatum and Errol Garner playing, sitting at the same piano at the same time. I would love to be, with all my heart, I'd love to be a fly on the wall just to see what that was like.
Yeah, that would be beautiful. So let me get to the crux of who you are and ask you this. Everyone has a version of you, your family, your friends, business associates, people that will be in the crowd in Kansas City and in all of your shows that you play, those that buy your CDs. But at the end of the day, you're piloting the ship. Who are you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, Jesus. It's a hard question.
I saved the best for last.
Essentially, I'm Southern. I'm basically Southern comfort, man. I like to think I'm a nice person, and I would like to think that I'm giving, and that, I'd like to think that there's certain things about me that people would probably argue that I'm selfish, but I don't think I'm very selfish. At least my ex-girlfriend thinks I'm selfish. I don't think I'm I love music. Music is definitely, I would say that I'm about 85 to 90% music.
Cool.
I love to eat. I love food. I love fried chicken and barbecue. I guess I'm just a normal. I don't know if people would say I'm normal, but I'm a good, clean Christian Southern boy from New Orleans, Louisiana, pretty much, who loves jazz and loves music and loves musicians. That's it.
I like it. Hey, Sullivan, thank you for taking a minute out for me today, and thank you for coming to Kansas City. Hopefully you have the time of your life here, and you get some good experiences.
Oh, man, I'm looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, New Orleans, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Sullivan for his visit to Kansas City, his time, and all of that music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.